Turn 1. The war begins. From the moment he broke free of the Everwinter which had entombed him, rolling thunder was ever the herald of Mogrek Longblade. The tread of hundreds of stone rogue idols, the beat of thousands of drums, and the lightning-racked thunderheads brought about by that same Everwinter now held tightly in Mogrek's fist. With a bellow of "Wah!" the bards would later claim shook Iskarion itself, the war began. A messenger reached Seraph Dariel in his garden. He said nothing as he received the news, and returned his hands to the soil as the runner departed. He'd already done all he could to prepare, and there was nothing more for him to do. Not yet. Caridius Lightbringer wiped the sweat from his brow and surveyed the battery of Dawnhammer bombards while hundreds of fellow Iskarneth made ready to fire. He spoke a quiet word of thanks to a dead woman, and in his thoughts he pictured the face of another. It was dark when, high upon the observation deck in Silmar City, a squire presented Selenar's bite to his warden upon bended knee, laid flat across his upturned palms. With a smile and a nod, she took the spear, spinning it in her hands before holding it up before those assembled like a torch. The moon's light caught it, and it flashed with cold fire, as though ignited by the glint of its own reflection. "By oaths sworn, this wrong too shall be righted," she breathed. In the quarry upon Tanuya, Basalt Lord Karang Sarn watched his aspiring champions depart, eager to witness their deeds in the name of the Everchosen. Elsewhere, the haunted woods of Celeria resonated with a solemn dirge sung by the Tetrarchy, a chant mourning those whom had not yet passed, even as they marched to war. Knight Arcanum, Atissa's mask impassive, betrayed no emotion, even as others gave rousing speeches before departing the library for battle, while Grey Seer Lixbit found no need to depart the Miscellaneum. The war had come to them. The war below! The coming of the Wa was heralded by the pounding of drums and hooves. The defenders of Underside, both its denizens and their allies, scrambled to shore up their defense of Iskarion's dark mirror. Lixbit directed efforts as the mercenary Fangs of Garm worked alongside the Skaven of Clan Refract to tear apart abandoned hovels and forgotten speakeasies to form a makeshift barricade around the almost city. It would not hold, but it would have to do. Ahead of the rotting wood and rusted metal of the new wall, a more substantial defense stood ready, as Iron Templar annihilators in service to the armies of Azir created a bulwark of Sigmarite and Grandhammers supported by the soldiers of the Watcher's Folly Dawnbringers. Hidden in dark crevices and partially collapsed tunnels around the perimeter, Sleeket Fangs, Molders, and Packmasters fought to hold back their chittering abominations until the time was right to let them loose upon the foe. Lixbit winced as they felt their arcane connection to their network of spy rats cut off one by one. The foe was here sooner than they had been led to believe. Many of the Undesired's allies were still out in the field chasing patrols of Auric spies, no doubt falling into traps and ambushes across the Lux Umbra. Somehow, Lixbit's intelligence had been subverted. They had obviously underestimated the Wa. Indeed, all across the shadowy hinterlands, desperate skirmishes broke out. Patrols of undesired cutthroats fell screaming beneath the fetid blades of cruel boys from Caritha's horde. Elsewhere, other members of the Iskarneth Alliance fared better. The Khmer Bray herd battered their way through a delaying force of weird knob necromancers to reach Underside proper, while Vashkora the War Dancer turned the Wa's ambushes against themselves, collapsing the tunnels they lay in wait within before they had a chance to emerge. The Shadow-sworn host found themselves caught up fighting the Shadow Trappers, weathering a rain of venom-encrusted arrows to descend upon the cruel boys in a storm of iron and fury. And throughout all the fighting, the drums never ceased. Closer and closer it came, a rhythmic cacophony threatening to consume all before it. The half-lit horizon billowed with dust kicked up by colossal hooves. Frantic outriders heralded the arrival, erstwhile highwaymen on screaming horses, clutching bleeding ears in shock as they retreated behind the Undesired's makeshift barricade, ushered into lashed-up medical tents tucked into tunnels and alcoves by the healers of the Black Lotus Combine. Lickspit stood atop the barricade, clutching their warpstone-tipped staff and nervously stroking the head of the spy rat they always kept with them, affectionately referred to as Speedy when not in others' company. The creature bruxed, whether in pleasure, fear, or both, Lickspit did not know, even with their arcane connection. They themselves fought to hold back the musk of fear. It had been years since they had succumbed to that particular biological inconvenience, but the apocalyptic discordance that approached was sorely testing their resolve. Then it arrived. A towering figure of misshapen metal and clattering bone capered precariously atop a truly monstrous maw grunta, its matted fur lashed with innumerable drums poached from all across the realms. Wapkagut roared and danced, gore stick and more stick glowing with green light as they beat out a frantic rhythm. Behind him, a truly staggering stampede of maw gruntas, gore gruntas, lithodons, and other great beasts beat out their own earth-shaking rhythm. The crush of beasts were twisted and distorted monstrously to the eyes of the defenders by a billowing cloud of hallucinogenic swamp gas, called forth by Tragok Skullsmacker's shamans, driving the orcs and their mounts to an even greater frenzy. With a screech, Lickspit called for their forces to abandon the barricade and retreat to the tunnels. There was no chance they'd be able to weather the stampede. Wapkagut would grind them to dust with his mere passing. As the Undesired and their allies sprinted for the tunnels, a volley of death rained down upon them. While the defenders were preoccupied by the looming violence of Wapkagut's forward assault, his forces had brought all manner of brutal instruments of death to bear from the flanks. Ned Blackpowder's cannons beat out a rumbling legato to accompany the staccato rhythm of Blisterpaw's Jezzails. Despite this, the majority of the defenders made it out of the killing ground thanks to Lickspit's direction, the unusual Skaven remaining in harm's way until the last possible moment as they attempted to save as many lives as possible. With a glance at the makeshift wall, they thought of the bulwark of Stormcast on the other side and cringed. Many would return to Azir this day. Lickspit suspected that some of the mortals that supported them might prove heroic enough to be taken to the anvil alongside them. The inevitable clash came like thunder, Sigmarite hammers beating out a new rhythm on battered plate and muscular flesh as the Stormcast met the riders head-on. More than a few peals of lightning rang out as Lord Celest and Aaron de Dreeghart's forces fell beneath the onslaught, but it was fewer than might have been expected. Despite their size, the warriors adeptly wove between trunk-like legs and whirling blades, crippling joints and redirecting the flow of the horde as best they could to protect the Dawnbringers. The Watcher's Folly forces did not merely cower behind the Sigmarite bulwark, however, gunners taking potshots at orcs and ogres as their mounts panicked below them, or to bring the sword to darting Snarlfangs and Orny Mournfangs. For a moment, the all-encompassing beat faltered. Wapkagut's eyes narrowed beneath his firm skull headdress, and with a bellow he redoubled his efforts, the beat somehow becoming even more frantic. Despite the Azurites' heroic efforts, the majority of the horde was able to break through. The barricade crushed beneath colossal hooves as if it had been nothing. The rear of the charge found themselves boxed in, however, when Sleeket Fang's nightmare beasts came rushing from rents in the earth all around them. They came from all sides, malformed abominations and mutated hordes alike, bogging down the feet of the enormous war beasts and swarming over the flanking artillery. The usually bustling pseudo-city was dark and dead as Wapkagut dismounted, the roar of battle seeming to die down to a mere hum without his crazed drumming. Even with his beat-addled mind, Wapkagut knew that this was just an illusion. The real fight would be below. He smacked the rump of his maw grunta with a meaty palm, setting it to wreak havoc among the shanty towns of underside surface while he led his warriors to clear out the vermin below. He looked about himself and grinned as his horde did the same. The defenders had stopped a few of the lads from making it in, but what he had left was more than enough, especially since this wasn't the only way in. Below the dusty earth, the Wild Bone Gang worked. Troggoths and ogres worked alongside Skaven to tunnel their way into the outlaw-infested warrens of Underside. Jakang Wildhook salivated greedily as he imagined the feast of unsuspecting ne'er-do-wells that lay within. When he finally broke through, he burst into the tunnel with a roar, expecting to find a gaggle of cowering, scrawny pirates. Instead, he was met with immediate resistance. Orgus the Ravager and his Bray herd laid in wait, Lixbit having correctly predicted the most likely location of a subterranean incursion. Alongside the bellowing beastmen, shambling ghasts and clattering skeletons poured forth, collected from the many forgotten corpses left in shootouts and back-alley deals gone wrong across all of Underside's long and sordid history, and raised with the magics of life and death by remnant sorcerers led by the Sylvaneth's Streakhorn and the Nighthaunt Haluspire Joassi, alongside the Soulblight Necromancer Victor Solveig. Those three, alongside another cadre of their reanimated host, stood alongside Lixbit and the Undesired in the upper tunnels, prepared to meet the invaders' headlong assault. Cratchit Minilive snarled and barked orders at his underlings, while Squirm Pactmaker cowered behind him, working to summon daemons to aid in the fight, uncomfortable at his proximity to the front line. The children of Humbris stood alongside the shadow-swarmed host in the shadowy tunnel, faces lit by guttering flames and sickly bioluminescent moss, as the forces of daybreak and darkness prepared to fight and die side by side. If Wapkagut expected this to be an easy extermination, he had another thing coming. Up above, the stragglers of Wapkagut's charge found themselves bogged down even further as the pooling blood of the slain suddenly began to writhe with foul energies, sanguine arms reaching up to grab the invaders' armored shins. The gore-drenched Nighthaunt pulled themselves from the carnage, horrific specters of animated ichor sending panic through the once bellicose warriors. As above, so below, Wapagut's vanguard finding themselves surrounded by rank upon rank of snarling cutthroats, undead horrors, and chittering ratmen. Lixbit stepped forward, head raised, and looked the war chanter in his single good eye. Wordlessly, they held each other's gazes for a long moment, both sides clutching their weapons tensely. Then, as if a spell had been broken, Wapkagut turned away, showing his back to the foe fearlessly.
Alright lads, show's over. Nothing else for us here. We did what the big told us. Let them have their stinking warrens.
And with that, he calmly padded out the way he had come, fellow warriors and foes alike watching with bemusement as the enigmatic orc walked away. He seemed like an entirely different creature to the mad drummer who had ridden down the walls of Underside, but even now, Lixbit's watchful eye caught his fingers tapping out a baleful rhythm on his sticks. Grumbling and snarling, the invaders followed him, squishing a few stray rats as they went for good measure. Lixbit winced at each one, but did not move. There was a good chance that, if Wapkagut had not decided to back off, both sides would have been all but obliterated. Wapkagut emerged into the half-light with an almighty bellow that brought both sides to a halt. A screaming phantom lunged at him, and without so much as looking, he grabbed its gore-soaked skull in one massive hand and crushed it to dust as if it had been nothing. He whistled loudly, and his great mount came charging through the rubble. He swung up onto his high saddle without the beast even slowing down, his remaining warriors doing the same. Before long, they had cleared out entirely, leaving the blood-stained cobbles ringing with awful silence. Lixbit emerged to survey the destruction. There was almost nothing left of Underside's surface, the tangle of shanties, walkways, and taverns reduced to rubble. The warren below had fared better, but with the assault from both ends, it had not been entirely spared. The news from further afield was worse. While the main forces of the Iskarneth defenders and Wapkagut's invaders had been focused on the city, both Downside and Bilge Bottom had been annihilated. Only a small remnant of the undesired cutthroats left to guard them, having made it out alive, carrying what they could from the remains of the Miscellaneum and shepherding surviving civilians to the last bulwark of the Lux Umbra. With a haunted look, an elven woman handed Lixbit a burned and splintered piece of polished wood. part of the great desk at the Miscellaneum Center, they realized. She stood there for a moment, breathing heavily. Then she said, almost whispering, "Make them pay."
Iskarneth Seraphate Minor Victory! The War at Sea!
It was upon the waters of the Prime Dominion that Mogrek would unleash the worst of his shackled Everwinter. Freezing winds whipped the liquid light into a rough and choppy spray, the foam turning to sludge atop the decks of Wa and Seraphate vessels alike. Great slabs of the surface froze and broke apart, creating a grinding morass capable of dashing a ship apart as surely as any rock. Commanded, more or less, by Captain Sharkbiter of the Auric Hulk Ungorkable, the Wa Armada poured from the Cataractus Realm Gate like a swarm of locusts, devouring anything too slow to escape. Those ships that hadn't sailed to join Mogrek had been cobbled together from the devastation they'd wrought along the way, entire forests put to the axe with which to new barges. Leading the Seraphate's flotilla was Admiral Soroya, a capable veteran who had faithfully served Dariel during the Civil War. Gathering to her a group of allied captains calling themselves the Blade Breakers, their strategy was simple: draw out straggling long-blade ships and cull them one at a time, bleeding Sharkbiter's armada through 1,000 cuts. Aboard the promised conflagration, Asavash the Serene turned the Everwinter's winds to steam and Ironfang mercenary hulks into flaming wrecks. The burning Templars were aided in their task by Varric Deval's Serpents, which saw orcs gleefully plunged into brawling boarding actions as Scarbiter's armada sought to prey upon fleeing fishing boats. Kido Takara of the Dragon's Eye would go on to score several kills, while clawing clouds of plague flies billowed from the craft of the mournful choir, suffocating long-blade crews aboard their ships before the battle even began, even as Baal Ut tore the still-beating hearts from Auric captives in a bloody tribute to Sotek. These and other victories would see the Blade Breakers claim early success. Despite this, Admiral Soroya grew increasingly concerned as the bulk of the armada spread unimpeded. The Wa-aligned Caradron of Meyric Galazgal captured several small islands unopposed, quickly establishing a beachhead, while Graka Redtooth and Trogboss Darka pillaged indiscriminately, ignoring Marshal Agron's attempts to bait them. Markella of the Viracross Exiles met Valentine of the Decaying Host in battle, two ancient soul-blight vampires finding themselves on opposing sides of this war, while the Ironfang fleet descended to overwhelm the smaller number of harrying vessels. The Bladebreakers had done all they could. Captain Sharkbiter would have to be brought to battle. The Shards of Weirnith would see another bitter battle as Admiral Soroya rallied her ships against the Wa Armada, their weight of numbers negated by the treacherous Shards. Orchestrated by Pyrotherge Gehirin, Soroya's trap was sprung as metaliths descended from the storm-racked skies, accompanied by two mighty Maw Crushers belonging to Varric Deval and the Knights Draconis of the Shattered Skies storm host, strafing the Wa ships with gouts of fire. Even as the battle turned to flame and steam, Sharkbait offered up a surprise of his own. Dozen of beast-skewer killbows bristle from the decks of many vessels, accompanied by lanky mobs of bolt boys. Anticipating the Seraphate's aerial supremacy after the battles of the Ashfall Delta, the skies blackened with a hail of wickedly tipped arrows. Those not slain by the cruel boy's withering fire are forced out of range, tipping the scales in favor of the Wa once again. Captain Sharkbite bellowed, and his boys took up the cheer as Big Bog and Ale-Guzzard Gargant straddled the Ungorkable's deck with a nasty great bow of cruel boy design. Taking up an arrow the length of a boat, it leapt from the makeshift bow with a streak of eye-searing green lightning, striking the first metalith and shattering it like a rock beneath a hammer. The lightning leapt from one metalith to another, setting them ablaze or breaking them apart, their occupants leaping clear and hoping to fall next to friendly ships, if they survived at all. The final blow would be struck by Sota the Fish, whose Sword of Twilight summoned the spirit of a shadow dragon to sweep across the decks of the remaining Bladebreakers. Reeling and risking a devastating rout, Admiral Soria was forced to sound a retreat, hoping to regroup beyond the Waa's surging advance.
Waa Mogrek, lesser victory. The war above.
On land, the Seraphate and her allies could not know where Mogrek would strike first. They'd fortified what they could and entrenched where they could not. In Mistra, the Finker's Waa mother sought to provoke Mogrek, like waving a red flag before a charging bull, and started her own greenskin brawl with the Baitmaster Bargog's help. In Adrel, the ghouls of House Highsong and the Vintolian army fell upon Cruel Boy scouts, while Valkara Crimson Forge made good on her promise to bolster Elisar City's defenses in placing cannons and mortars upon the walls. Anticipating attack, Princess Eris Lucius coordinated the city's defense, bolstered by the formidable Stormcast Eternals of the Guardian Legion and the Incarmen House of Terran. A Lumineth Loreseeker come to halt Mogrek's advance. They easily fended off what little came their way, and it soon became apparent to all within the city that the Longblade would not fall upon them this day. The Four Sisters would fare similarly. Had the Waa come upon them, they would have found a score of Chaos hosts eager for battle. Some among them interpreted their nominal allegiance to the Seraphate more loosely than others, as the dark oath of the Burning Chorus scoured the Sisters for captives. Those taken were given a simple choice: to join the Chorus or be fed to the Soul Forges. The Nurgle-tainted Sylvaneth of the Spore Song swarm plunged into the deep forests, while Magistus Rotspleen secured supplies to better defend the Sisters from a hapless Duardan merchant caravan, and Japathai Twistflame bid the inherent magics of the Prime Dominion itself to their will. At the Colosseum, Bram Talos Incinerati would jest that the rats were playing cards with the ghosts in their boredom, while the mercenaries of Krog Bogsloggers would find no enemy to fight in Talnuya. Upon Lors, the armies of Azir committed in strength to similar result as the Dark Choosing, as Fireslayers, Caradron, and Stormcast Eternals scoured the countryside for an enemy that did not show. Within the library of Galarian, Knight Arcana Tissa watched and waited, their sanctum defended by the beast-faced stormcast of Sick Bloodhorn, the witch elves of the Coven of Twilight's Blade, and the indomitable and very literate Ogre Chungus. The Remnant's deathly touch likewise sought the enemy across Hissus, Nemes, and Zilarial, with little luck. It was then that Mogrek's strategy became horrifically apparent. Although their targets seemed chosen without reason, the Waa had descended upon each like an avalanche, gathering momentum as more and more warbands joined the attack. It was the skyport of Corinth that would feel their fury first. Caridius Lightbringer had labored for half a year preparing for this very moment, yet that did nothing to ease the knot in his stomach as his spotters caught sight of the signal flares over Corinth. Idols spotted, fire at will. It fell to Lord Relictor Doran and his Ruination Chamber to hold the line. Yet it was not Ulrix that set upon him, but Gajak the Savage, a bloodthirster of Khorne. Demonic skull cannons howled as they shot green and gold Karajan ships from the sky before turning on the prosecutors and stormdrakes of Doran's Stormscale Covenant as they counterattacked. Gajak's advance was halted only as Doran met the demon in single combat, meteoric shield turning aside the monster's hell-forged axe time and time again. Yet Doran was only a single warrior, and Gajak's Khornate legion seethed around the pounding tread of Mogrek's rogue idols. Joined now by ogres and gargants, their shared rage seemed to drive each other's fury to new heights, and the skyport was split open. Their targets zeroed, the Dawnhammer bombards opened fire, Nullstone rounds smashing the rogue idols apart even as they charged forward, heedless of the punishing casualties. Daemons dissolved to nothing, and ogres were crushed as the idols were reduced to rubble. Their momentum faltered, and the Seraphon of the Exentile Tolian counterattacked from within the skyport. Saurus fell by the score for the audacious attack, but upon reinforcement by a screaming Sea-Orc Fishbane, the Waa was put to flight. Silmer City did not fare as well. The Lumineth storm mages, Aladrek and Asaurora, had prepared their defenses well, but now they stood alone against the full might of Wa Mograk. They sat at the base of the mountain where Silmar City rested. Surrounding them were Huracan wind chargers, Venari sentinels, Dawn Riders, a force built for hit-and-run tactics. Above them, higher on the mountain path, awaited the bulwark of the force, a wall of spikes, blades, and hammers as Venari wardens locked shields, with blade lords and stone guard prepared for any breach of the shield wall, and behind them, towering Hathorians waited to charge. The more mobile force below needed to dwindle the attackers' numbers, harass the enemy as much as possible. They knew higher up the mountain is where the battle would truly begin, but Asaurora wanted to hit the enemy early and hard and from afar as long as possible. Unfortunately, possible would not last very long. The little wren, knight-errant of Mossroot, and her emerald pilgrims would race the screaming court of Mad Queen Silenor, each mob of frenzied flesh-eaters eager to be the first to spill Seraphate blood. Their pace matched by the loping run of a dozen rogue idols, Aldredic's strategy was swept aside in minutes, their retreat threatening to collapse into a rout. Even as the freezing storm clouds clawed at the mountain fastness, bombards boomed in the distance, smashing apart the rogue idols even as they approached Asarora's second line. For a moment, it appeared the Lumineth would hold, ghoul horrors matched blow for blow by mighty Hathorians. Then the sky turned to blood-red flame. Piloted by Azoth Realmgorger, a metal monstrosity streaked through the heavens towards Silmar City, borne aloft by Mad Queen Silenor's sinister magic, and whose person now clung to the side of it. The accounts of those who fled would describe it as a flaming comet whose impact incinerated several blocks. From the ruin came howling half-burnt ghouls and the blackened bone-rot warriors of Karathas Khan. Commanding what remained of the city's quickly crumbling defense, Renea Oathsworn fought in the burning streets alongside the lost one Leith Ashendon, a solitary stormcast who now served as bodyguard in the feverish melee. Renea had seen bitter defeat before and knew already the city was lost, as hope of escape was cut off by the cunning shadow splitters of Weird Knob Dolgul, whose inspired infiltration earned him the title of the Wise. Renea prepared herself for the end. It was only a chance encounter with Myos Altengard of the Undesired that saved the last defenders of Silmar City. He'd arrived on reconnaissance just as the battle had begun, and ushered Renea and the others through secret ways which had been known only to Lixbit. Seemingly unbothered by the raging inferno about her, Leith Ashendon was the last to quit the battle, claiming to witness two massive monsters wreathed in steam commanding the Wa's forces as they obliterated what remained of the city. The reason for Myos Altengard's mission had been simple prudence. Wapkagut was a simple creature, by all accounts, and neither downside nor bilge bottom lay in the direct path of his anticipated assault. Of course, the Undesired had anticipated some amount of minor raiding as the war host hustled towards the Undercity, and had left what they believed to be sufficient defenders at each location, a mix of local outlaws and outsiders sworn to the Undesired. At Bilgebottom, Baitmaster Bargok set about readying his captured beasts to raid any Wa camps that might appear in the area, while the ghouls of Skinnerkin haunted Downside. It was not nearly enough. Bargok found his raiding plans scuppered when a Wa force led by Razak the Soul Whisperer, Kuzma Wolfwing, and Durlock Ma Wrangler descended upon him like a tidal wave. The Baitmasters Trogos found themselves hopelessly outmatched by the combined might of wolves, gruntas, orcs, and vampires that fell upon the old mining encampment, and it was all he and his Undesired allies could do to escape their lives. The situation in Downside was no better. Faced with the combined might of the Blackstone Warhost, the Loon Champa Trogherd, and the Coalcut tribe, all backed by the Gargant mercenaries of the Hyakiago, Ilnaskret's ghouls fell back to the Miscellaneum, linking up with the local mercenaries that had been left to guard it. Together, they focused on escaping the skyport with as many civilians and vital resources from Lixbit's throne room as possible, falling back towards Underside, taking heavy losses on the way. The skyport and all its myriad benefits had been lost to the Undesired, and the wider Iskarneth alliance for good. The Miscellaneum, so painstakingly fortified, as well as the old Undercliff Inn where so many tales had been told and drinks spilled, were both reduced to rubble with the Wah's passing. Mogrek's hand was now revealed, for the Wah had thrown its full might against only a small handful of Iskarnath positions. Spread thin, the Seraphite and her allies could not have known where they would be hit the hardest, and simple luck of the draw conspired against them.
2 rogue idol battle groups destroyed. Silmar City destroyed. Bilge Bottom destroyed. Downside destroyed. The war ahead.
Battles won and battles lost. The Seraphite had already begun to burn regardless. Just as Dariel dug in his garden, Mogrek sat upon his great stone throne, each snarling breath ragged and pained from the sword blade between his ribs. He would let Wapkagut and the Mooncaller have their fun. The Seraphite would falter in time, and when it did, Mogrek Longblade would step forward to slaughter it just as he butchered their champion in the Ashfall Delta.
The war beyond. Others watched, even now. Eyes long since lost to blinding light, and eyes that reflected only inky darkness. Eyes glowing red, their number beyond counting. They watched and waited. Their time would come soon enough.